Hold a peach pit in your hand for a moment. Feel how heavy it is, how hard. Most folks give it a single glance and drop it in the bin, the way we were all taught to. But that little stone is not a scrap. It is a whole tree, folded up small and fast asleep. A peach, or a plum, a cherry, an apricot, an almond, waiting on one thing that almost nobody ever gives it. And here's the part they never tell you. Some of these pits are close to a sure thing. A peach or an apricot will hand you a tree that carries its parents' fruit more faithfully than you would ever guess. And some of them, a cherry, a plum, are a roll of the dice in the most wonderful way. Before we are done, you will know exactly which is which and how to give any of the five what it has been waiting for all along. There is no nursery to drive to, no bag to buy, just the fruit you were already going to eat this summer and 3 plain steps that have been quietly working since long before either of us was born. So let us start with the reason most people fail. And they do fail. They push a pit into a pot of soil, set it on the sill, and wait, and nothing ever comes. It is not their soil. It is not their green thumb. They skipped the one thing every stone fruit seed is built to demand: a winter. Think of where these trees come from. Peaches, plums, cherries, apricots, almonds. Every one of them grew up in country with real, hard winters. And the seed inside that pit is wound like a clock. It will not sprout in the warm. Not because it cannot, but because a long line of ancestors taught it better. If it woke the moment the fruit dropped in late summer, the little seedling would meet the heat and the drought and die before its first autumn. So the seed waits. It counts the cold. Only after it has felt enough weeks of cold and damp, a whole winter's worth, does it let itself believe that spring is finally safe and begin to grow. Gardeners have a fancy word for this: stratification. But all it really means is giving the seed the winter it is waiting for. Skip the winter, and the clock never starts. Give it the winter, and the same pit that sat dead for you all year comes alive nearly on its own. That is the whole secret. Everything else is just good details, the kind that turn one lonely seedling into a dozen, and we will get to every one of them. Now let me tell you the thing the seed catalogs would rather you did not dwell on. When you plant a seed, you are not making a copy. You are making a child. It carries its mother and its father and a whole family reunion of trees you never had. Plant the seed of a grocery store apple and you will almost never get that apple back. You will get something brand new, and more often than not, something you would not care to eat. But here is the quiet exception, the part almost nobody prints. A few fruits break that rule. Peaches, apricots, and their smooth cousins, the nectarines, mostly see to their own pollination. So their seedlings come out remarkably close to the parent. Grow a peach from a good peach pit, and the odds are honestly on your side that you will get yourself a fine peach. That is not a promise of a perfect twin. It is far better than most folks dare to hope, and it is true. And here is a small wonder to tuck away. A nectarine is really nothing but a peach that misplaced its fuzz. Plant a peach pit and you might even get a nectarine looking back at you, or plant a nectarine and get a peach. The very same tree, wearing a different coat. The cherries and the plums? Those are your wildcards. A sweet cherry seedling can look nothing like its mother, and it may make you wait the better part of 10 years to find out. A seed-grown tree also skips the dwarfing roots the nursery builds into its trees, so it can grow tall and take its own sweet time. And do bear in mind, most fruit you carry home from the store came off a grafted tree to begin with. So its seed was always going to write its own story, not simply repeat its parents'. Now, before you hear the word wildcard as bad news, let me tell you about a man named Luther Burbank. Out in Santa Rosa, California, 100 years ago, Burbank did little else but plant seeds. Thousands upon thousands of them, watching for the 1 in 1,000 worth keeping. From that patient gamble came some 800 new plants, over 100 kinds of plum alone. His Santa Rosa plum, born of a single seed back in 1906, grew so beloved that by 1945 it made up more than a third of every plum grown in the whole state of California. He even crossed a plum with an apricot and gave us the very first plumcot, the grandfather of every fancy plute on the store shelf today. Every one of those began as a seed that came out a little different from its parent. That difference is not a flaw. It is the very engine that gave us every fruit we love. So when your cherry pit grows into something all its own, you are not failing. You are standing right where Burbank stood. And here is why nobody hands you this at the garden center. You cannot patent a pit. You cannot bottle a winter in a refrigerator drawer. You cannot sell a man a peach tree every spring when the one he grew for nothing is standing right there in his own yard. A grafted tree at the nursery runs $30, $40, $50, and there is a fair business in that. A pit costs nothing and can be owned by no one. Nobody hid this from you. The market simply never had a reason to keep reminding you. So let us do it. Step 1. Freeing the seed. This is where nearly every failure is quietly decided, at the very beginning, before a single thing goes into the fridge. When you have finished your fruit, do not drop the pit in a pot. Carry it to the sink. Rinse it under running water and scrub every last thread of fruit off that shell with an old brush. This is not fussiness. Any flesh left behind turns to mold in the weeks ahead, and mold is the single most common thing that kills a seed before it ever gets its chance. Then set the clean pits on a towel, out of the sun, and let them dry a couple of days. Here is a free little test worth 30 seconds. Drop your cleaned pits in a glass of water and leave them overnight. The ones that sink are usually your keepers. The ones that bob up at the top are often hollow or spent. No harm in trying them, but if you are short on room, plant the sinkers first. Now, the shell. For peaches and apricots, I like to crack that hard outer shell and lift out the true seed inside. It looks for all the world like a little almond. Wrap the pit in a cloth and tap it with a hammer, or use a nutcracker, gently, with control. You want to open the shell, not crush what is in it. A freed seed feels the winter faster and sprouts more willingly than one still locked in its vault. For plums and cherries, the shell is thinner. You can leave those whole, and a light rub of one end on sandpaper helps the water find its way in. And here is a word I want to say plainly, because I would say it to my own brother across the fence. That seed inside the shell looks like an almond. It is not a snack. The kernels of these stone fruits carry a natural compound that turns into something genuinely poisonous if you eat them raw. The Food and Drug Administration put out a warning about bitter apricot kernels not long ago, after folks were being sold them as a health food. There is a true account of a woman of 78 who tossed a handful into a smoothie, thinking they were almonds, and was sick within the hour. So we handle these seeds with respect, and we plant them. We do not eat them. Fair enough? Good. One last thing while your hands are busy. If you mean to give these seeds their winter in a bag, mix them a little bed first. 1 part coarse sand to 1 part perlite. When researchers compared what to pack seeds in, that plain sand and perlite mix beat the richer stuff, because it holds just enough damp without ever going soggy. Simple almost always wins here. Step 2. We give the seed its winter, and the whole of it happens in a corner of your refrigerator. Take your clean seeds and that damp sand and perlite mix, just moist enough that it holds together when you squeeze it, but not a drop runs out. Tuck the seeds in, slip it all into a bag or a jar, leave it cracked, open a hair for air, and set it in the fridge. You are aiming for cold, but not freezing. Right around 35 to 40 degrees Fahrenheit, which is just about where most refrigerators already sit. Now, the waiting. And this is where knowing your fruit earns its keep. A peach wants the longest winter. Figure 90 to 120 days. An apricot is close behind, 80 to 100. Plums and cherries ask for 60 to 90, and an almond is the quickest of the bunch, often ready in 40 to 60. Start your peaches in the fall, and they will be stirring right as spring comes on. Here is a trick for the stubborn ones. The plums and cherries that sometimes just sit there and sulk. Out in the wild, a pit does not drop straight into winter. It lies in warm autumn ground first, so give the tricky ones a taste of that. 4 weeks somewhere warm, around 70 degrees, and only then into the cold. When growers tested it, that warm spell before the chill lifted the number of plum seeds that came up. It is the difference between mimicking a winter and mimicking the whole turning of a year. Gardeners call that stubbornness a double dormancy. 2 locks on the door instead of 1. And the warm spell is simply the key to the first. Look in on the bag every couple of weeks. If the mix has dried, mist it back to barely damp. And watch for your signal. A small white root tip, no bigger than a grain of rice, nosing its way out of the seed. The moment you see it, that seed is ready, and it does not care one bit what the calendar says. The root tip is the calendar. And if all of this feels like a fuss, there is an older way. The one your grandparents likely used without a name for it. In the fall, just plant the pits an inch or 2 down in a quiet corner of the garden, mark the spot, and let the real winter do the entire job for free. It works well right through the northern half of the country, where the ground gets good and cold. Nature ran this program long before there was a refrigerator to run it in. You may hear of growers using a plant hormone, gibberellic acid, to hurry seeds along without the cold. It is real, and it has its place. But just between us, a free winter in a drawer is steadier and costs nothing. And in all my years, I have never once needed the shortcut. Step 3. Turning that root tip into a tree that truly lives. When your seed shows its little white root, or its winter is up, get a pot ready. At least 8 inches deep, with good holes in the bottom. Fill it with a decent potting mix loosened with a handful of perlite, because there is one thing a young stone fruit will not forgive, and that is wet feet. Make a hole about 1 inch deep. Lay the seed in with the root tip pointing down, and cover it over gently. Water it well until it runs from the bottom, then set it somewhere warm and bright. But not in harsh, blazing sun, not yet. A windowsill with morning light, or a sheltered spot outdoors in soft shade, is just right until the seedling has pushed its first 4 to 6 real leaves. From planting to that first green shoulder shrugging out of the soil is usually 1 to 3 weeks for a seed that got its proper winter. If a whole month goes by with nothing, the winter likely ran short. Make a note and give it longer next season. Once it is up and growing, ease it toward the sun over a couple of weeks, a little more each day. And when you feed it lightly. A weak liquid feed at half the label's strength, no more than once every couple of weeks. So you are coaxing those young roots along and never burning them. By the close of that first season, a well-tended seedling can stand 2 to 3 feet tall and be ready for a home of its own. Now, before we go on, everything we have covered, and the parts still to come, I have gathered onto a single page. The winter each fruit needs, the ones that come true, and the ones that surprise you. The honest year by year of what to expect. All of it, on one clean sheet you can tape inside the shed door or tuck in a kitchen drawer. Point your phone at the code on the screen and it is yours. No charge and nothing to sign up for. Then stay right here, because the next part is the handful of small mistakes that quietly undo more seedlings than bad luck ever has. Let us talk about those mistakes, because every one of them is easy to make and every one is easy to dodge once you have seen it. The first, and the biggest, is cutting the winter short. Somebody sets a peach pit in soil, gives it 2 weeks, sees nothing, and decides it was a dud. But a peach may need 100 days of cold before it will so much as think about waking. There is no talking it out of that. The biology asks what it asks, and the only answer is patience. The second is a soggy bed. Moist is the word. Damp, like a wrung-out cloth. If you can squeeze water out of the mix, it is too wet, and too wet means rot. Add a little dry sand and work it through until it is just barely damp. The third comes after the seedling is up, and it is the one that breaks the most hearts. Overwatering. A young stone fruit wants steady moisture but sharp drainage. Let that pot sit soggy more than a day or two, and the roots drown. The seedling wilts, folds, and looks for all the world like it simply gave up. It did not give up. It went under. Water when the top of the soil is dry to your finger, not by the clock. And the fourth is rushing it out into the wide world. A seedling raised soft on a windowsill is not ready for full sun and wind. Move it out by degrees. An hour or 2 of morning sun, then half a day, then its full place. Over a week or so. Hurry that, and the leaves scorch, and the whole plant sulks at the very moment it ought to be pouring everything into its roots. Now let me give you the honest calendar, because I would far rather you trust me in year 3 than be dazzled today. That first year, you are growing a leafy young tree in a pot, no fruit and none expected. That is the year you are building roots, not peaches. By year 2 or 3, your tree goes into the ground and starts to find its feet. A peach, bless it, is the sprinter of the family. A happy seedling peach can offer up its first fruit in as little as 3 to 5 years, though some take their time toward 8. An apricot is close on its heels. The cherries and plums will test your patience. A seed-grown cherry can make you wait the better part of 10 years. And remember, it is a wild card, so what shows up may be all its own. And because a seedling grows on its own roots, without the dwarfing the nursery builds in, give it room. It may reach for the sky the way the old standard trees did. If that height gives you pause, a little summer pruning each year keeps a tree within easy reach of a picking basket. You are the one who decides how tall it is allowed to grow. None of that is a reason not to plant. It is a reason to plant this year, so the clock starts turning now. The best time to put a tree in the ground was 20 years ago. The second best time is the afternoon you finish this peach. And here is the piece that turns every one of those wildcards into a sure thing. The old orchard keeper's secret that ties this whole story together. Remember how I said the nursery's fine trees skip the seed? That is not quite the whole truth. Nearly every grafted peach, plum, and almond you can buy is standing on roots that began exactly like yours. A seedling, grown from a pit. The United States Department of Agriculture released one of the most widely planted peach rootstocks in the country back in 1959, and to this very day it is raised from seed by the thousands. When researchers at Clemson University counted, those seed-grown rootstocks came up at around 60 to 65 out of every 100. Not so very far from what you will manage on your own windowsill. So here is the move. Grow your seedling. Let it get strong. And if it turns out to be one of the wild cards, a cherry, a plum, you do not have to gamble on its fruit at all. You take a small twig from a tree whose fruit you already love, and you graft it onto your own seedling's trunk. Your free seedling becomes the roots and the strength. The twig becomes the fruit. That is precisely what every orchard in this country does. You have simply done the hard half, the rooting, yourself, and for nothing. And if you would rather not graft at all, if you would rather let that cherry seedling grow up and simply show you what it wants to be, that is a fine and honest choice too. Some of the finest trees I have ever known were nobody's plan. We will walk through that graft another day, slow and plain, the two of us. But I wanted you to know it is there, waiting, so that no pit in your hand ever needs to feel like a gamble again. The peach we started with, the one you were holding in your hand. I want you to pick it back up for just a moment. My grandmother kept a few scrappy trees at the back of her lot, grown from pits she had saved in a chipped cup on the windowsill. As a boy, I thought they were nothing much. It took me the better part of a lifetime to understand what she was really doing out there. She was not growing trees, exactly. She was handing tomorrow a little of what she herself had been given. And every one of those trees lived or died, not by the pit, but by the ground she set it in. The dark, crumbling, living soil she fed with everything the kitchen and the garden gave back. Feed that soil, and the tree very nearly raises itself. That is the whole of it, really. A pit is a promise. The winter wakes it, the soil raises it, and the patience. The patience is yours to give. If that is the kind of gardening you come from, or the kind you would like to grow into, then you already belong here at Elder Gardens. Subscribe, and let us keep tending the old, honest way, together. And the next time you finish a peach on a warm afternoon, you will know that what is left in your hand was never trash at all. It was a tree, waiting on a winter, and on you.